Chapter 11, Frankenstein finally sits down with his creation, the monster as he is so commonly called, and hereabouts we hear the sad tale thereof. A creature born with not only an absence of knowledge, but an absence of guidance. The only things left to him but his incredible strength and capacity for tenacity. Thereabouts, he marches his way through the forests of Ingolstadt, finding what little he can to survive, with naught but the clothes he had availed himself of from Victor himself. In the forest, he becomes acquainted with all manner of things, from the dawning of the day to the falling of night. Food, fire, and yet naught did this suffice him. Thereafter, he found himself needing to go further for the sake of subsistence, and thereabouts, as he wandered, he encountered human beings. Each of them regarded him as he was seen, not as the towering youth which was bequeathed to him, and he yet at this point only still fostered, but as a dark thing of artifice, unknown, strange, and terrifying. Oh no. In the big blurry highlight I didn't even get to see. This thing, this is horrible. We've got quite the catastrophe ahead. Specifically, and for no other reason than that where we had it before, we can no longer splash in the blood fountain. That's a miserable consequence. I can't believe they let this happen to us. We couldn't squish gore anymore. There's no button for that. Now we can't even enjoy ourselves with the tumor in our nice little fountain. At one point, after attempting to make contact with the good village folk of the area, they, upon encountering him, began pelting him, and upon such an assault, he fled and took on a clandestine approach. Only there did he find himself within a small hovel, barely sufficient for him, but better than nothing, and by happenstance, it was connected to a cottage of a small family, thus far described, a fair young woman, a hale young man, and an elder among them. And here, only here, was he able to see that humankind was perhaps not so vile and wretched, that they had culture, kindness, melody, that they had each other. And with this very small window through from his side of a dilapidated annex of the house to theirs, he begins to feel human.
What was that?
Yeah, I agree. What was that? Chapter 11 elucidates everything which I had spoken about in my post-humanist perspective previously, that all of the features which we associate to humanity, sociality, solidarity, familiarity, and episteme, knowledge, each and every one of these is something that is a mere set of properties attained by the form of matter, and these forms of matter we call humans, only by the fact that the essences those properties aforesaid are correlated distinctly with us, but they didn't simply arrive by happenstance or by exceptionality, and on the precipice of technology as we are today, not to mention familiarity with other species with sufficient intelligence and cognitive capacities, all of these essences we associate with humanity are portrayed as discreetly not limited to humans, and so the exceptionality of humanism and even transhumanism begins to evaporate. Okay, and now for a monster to pop out of the ceiling, walls, and floors all at once. Not multiple, just a single monster. Like the worm in Dead Space, come to drag me down to the bottom. Have me as a nice little worm snack. Okay, well, my prediction was better than I thought it'd be, that's for sure. In Chapter 12, we see more of Frankenstein's monster becoming equipped and familiarized with those notes of humanity which he had only just before become somewhat acquainted. And furthermore, he's beginning to learn the language of human beings. That there is not just the chirping of birds, the howling of landed animals, or the rustlings and bellows of nature herself, but that there is an entire dimension of communication which is accessible to him. That whereas all things in nature might recognize themselves in themselves, and so shallow by comparison, that these are as he, and he is as these, Agatha, Felix, and Father, and that all of them might be not as a burden to one another as he had encountered with others, not just boon, yet family. Woo! Praise be to Mechanus! In Chapter 12, alongside 11, it felt, at least in my perspective, like this was the entire purpose of the book, and, given the preface that we encountered of Mary Shelley's words herself, I think that might be a fair suggestion, and in a very novel way, counter to what we experience in most presentations of monstrous figures, whether they have redeeming qualities or not. This book does what I think only really has opportunity in niche kinds of video game, movies, books, but especially tabletop role-playing games. In that, what is ascribed as evil, vile, or otherwise unbefitting of our humanity is able to be expressed not just in a third, second, but first-person perspective. They can give their own details. Ow. What the hell? I didn't even touch you. Oh, shit. Well, I guess that hitboxes don't matter for that one. It's gonna do what it's gonna do. Oh. It's the meat curtains that got me. Oh no. It's a great thing in that case that I have this giant bottle of opiates that will do me very well. Can procure and provide their own experiences, such that we understand the who, what, when, where, and why of their existence. And, in the great mixing ecology of various forces and sources of being, we can observe how they relate to those that we are intended to sympathize with, or at least to associate with ourselves. And while this might seem like a far reach, when you look at films that focus on villains and how they became villains, and likewise with other kinds of monstrosity, we can see the earliest seeds of this here and displayed par excellence. Oh, you're in front of the door. It's like a big pile of dog shit that you can't scoot around. The unnamed monster finally sees not the bleak of winter, but instead spring. And there alongside, a new entrant to the family he had been staying next to. Sophia, beknownst to Felix, though having no understanding of the language of the people, becomes one of their charges, and therein is taught not only a great sum of their language, but also their history, of the virtuous and vicious, of the highest pleasures and the lowest derelictions, obscene wealth and miserable privation. The story of what our species has done, besides all other things, to itself and the place it calls home. As the monster learns more and more of language, like the explosion of the Renaissance, his awareness that we are all in a story of our own has awakened him, not only to those whom he has called friend, yet never spoken a word to himself, but to what he is, and, more importantly, what he is not. Alright, well, nice knowing y'all. Let's go to hell! What Chapter 13 highlights is the value of not just linguistics in abstract, but linguistics in concrete. That language itself is merely another expression of deep time, the collection of causalities, events, effects, stacked one on top of another, such that, as everything itself is, in index to one another, language and the way that it is applied by any given communicator, be it the most minute of protobacteria to the most eloquent of rhetorician, each and every single instance of utterance, and all of the things that it took to put them together, had things that led thereto. You usually don't need instructions. And so from the outside, etic perspective of a being which has never experienced language and history, deep time, in connection, not to mention all the things that are contained within this category, that this is the fundament, the foundation, the crux, the core, the root of all experience, of all second-order self-awareness, that what we call humanity, that what we associate in this way, the semantics we curl around that syntactic production, not only have ultimate reasons, but are in and of themselves chains that lead to more reasons, to include what we call reason itself.
One of my responsibilities as a baron is that of a prison warden. This is where criminals are locked up. Like a dungeon? Very much so. Come.
At least he was honest about it. If you're going to have a horrible torture dungeon, you might as well at least have the people you're bringing down be straight up with you, and vice versa. And speaking of, I don't know how much money this guy had, but Agrippa was dripped out. Not only did he have massive statues of lions on the first floor, But down here too, I don't know how you could even remotely hope to transport this many, probably hundreds of pounds of stone down here, but they did it. Jokes aside, the humongous size of this place, coupled with its very intricate and sometimes very ornate architecture, supposes that the people who originally built this, or maybe even added on to it over time, they had a lot of resources. And in this way, that even if we know almost nothing else about Cornelius and all of the exchanges over in Africa digging around in the sand, that not only is the owner himself powerful, but whatever he sees in this orb that we've uncovered is almost certainly just as, if not more. Ooh. Hammer time. Again, I ask, why would you have an oil decanter in what is clearly a cell? Anti-storytelling environments, they also exist, and when they do, unless you have created a sufficiently compelling narrative and, unless like in that moment, you have something that is either urgent or otherwise mechanically engaging enough to distract the player, it can very easily detract the player's attention by breaking immersion. Oh, well, I'm glad they have a convenient little shop sign for this area. Just in case you're unfamiliar with the dungeons and for some reason you need to get around. So it looks like the acid is, upon contact with any one of the physics-enabled objects, triggering an event, and then applying some sort of shader effect, which, thank you to the individual who taught me a little bit about shaders, that makes it appear to dissolve while it in fact despawns. Because I can't imagine any one of these meshes genuinely breaking apart topologically like that. That might be the case. It seems very resource intensive for the calculations. Oh, shit. Nah, man. No, it's good. I assure you, I am ruined if he comes in here. Don't look in here, you heinous face eater. I am not tasty. I'm also not in here. So, you know, double loss if you come in this room. Huh. Vast underground area, weird strange monsters, shit found in the middle of Africa, dissolving and torturing people for their soul goo. This reads very much like an interpretation of what the alchemist from Lovecraft probably had. You think about it. The guy there was also another ancient noble. Voices and cosmic forces from beyond the veil interfacing with you directly and spontaneously generating and getting rid of a bunch of stuff. I'm gonna look this up after I'm done streaming, but I guarantee this is strongly correspondent to that book, which I do plan on doing a reading of. Ooh, it is. As far as The Alchemist, yeah, I think it's right on the face of it, which I am always happy to see. Anything that carries out an inspired story to its natural conclusion. I also feel like perhaps it has a little bit of influence in some interpretations of Underdark areas, as you see in many D&D themed, if not directly in-universe worlds. You can hardly go by without seeing at least some Dwagar or Drow dungeons that are roughly laid out in such a fashion, and to a greater extent I wouldn't be surprised if those also accounted for some of the influences. That dungeons in and of themselves might have some significant crossover with the inspirations of The Alchemist and particularly the Mound. Because let me tell you, in my vast underground realm that I am going to have as the primary basis of one of my settings, it's also heavily inspired by the Mound. I'm glad I found the hammer earlier then. Oh, I guess not then. Can I drill it? Will it drill? The answer is no. Having properly put titles and everything to some of the recap and review style stuff from back whenever I was doing the short stories and parts of the Dream Quest of Unknown Gothic, I really had been making some grandiose claims about the influence of Lovecraft. How he is effectively the foundation for so many of the things which are not just tropes, things that are played out, cliches, but in fact the core essences of so many things that are taken for granted. They have become so familiar that they are background, like Underdark, dungeons, things of this sort, and their overland counterparts. And so I don't think, ultimately, that they are really all that grandiose. Those features? Oh, shit. Oh, fuck, I'm dead. I'm ruined. I am gone. This is the end, my friend. No, 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 no! Fuck! Stuck me against the wall. Run, you bastard! Shit! Well, I do have to carry on. That is true. My wayward son. There will be peace when I'm done. Probably. Oh, no. Was this scripted? Was I meant to die here? Alright, well, they got me. There does exist naturally inspirations before his pieces, though from what I vaguely understand of the writers before Lovecraft and those of his vein, they weren't really synthesized together in any meaningful way, which in some fashions is good because it means that the style of writing, the things that are taken as the a priori background, are not ossified, turned into a bone-like structure that other things borrow and lean on so heavily. It's more amorphous. But in other ways, it means that not only is the audience going to be less familiar, but at the same time, there is a greater difficulty in constructing coherency. I'm glad the monster... Ah, to you too. The rats in the walls gave me so much inspiration for my settings version of the Underdark. I can imagine. I have always been mightily interested by things like dry stone stacks, and ever since I learned about it in both science and philosophy, the concept of emergence, that combining these two kinds of ideas to suppose something that is not artificial but might feel so because it seems so, in the gross sense, natural, but in the net sense, unnatural. Tiny perforations all throughout rather than the continuously connected stone in something that resembles an Underdark setting is a massive inspiration for my kind of deal. That having some very coarse aggregate like dry stack stones would be advantageous to any kind of civilization that's living under there rather than expressly like cut blocks, for instance. What the fuck? I was extremely concerned I was having an Asmongold moment, and suddenly a massive swarm of little skitterers were come about to consume the flesh off my bones. I can't believe that a 2010 game got me with that old, there's a spider suddenly in your screensaver trick. Man, I think part of my brain fell out whenever I got killed by the monster. Nobody says, my Underdark isn't all vast underground voids. It's separate pockets connected by magical nodes. These nodes can be activated by burning spell slots, and not all nodes can take you to all of the others. I appreciate that. I have always been fascinated by the idea of having a world connected in a much more fine-grained pattern by little teleportation circles and things of the sort. I think that the ancient teleportation sigils in Baldur's Gate 3. For a video game, their implementation of fast travel is good, but in one where the consequences of your actions have a great deal more versatility, flexibility, verticality, and laterality, it would be best to have something where you must at least perform something like burning spell slots and not have them all interconnected. And the teleportation circle does this well with its requisite of runes, their specific signatures, but I don't think that is good enough for a high magic world. Oh shit. No. You're not gonna... You're gonna... No. I will not let you SCP me. I got too much to live for. Way too much laudanum to drink.
So you used the drain sewers as a means of transport?
Yes, they were built to divert water from an underground spring and are quite spacious. It seemed only natural to incorporate it into the overall structure.
That's truly brilliant. And something I haven't seen outside of Metro, the idea that sewers in and of themselves, especially when flooded properly, can be used as a primary means of traversal. I'm sure there are various settings that take advantage of that, but they're very sparing, probably for the point of enabling simplicity in the storytelling. And yet, as a matter of fact, it would make the most sense for covert means of travel. Okay, so we have... I agree. Nobody says. Party needs to find the right nodes to get around. Also, there are things that also use those nodes. They know when others, like the party, are using them as well. I should hope so. If you have a universalistic kind of magic system, at least one that admits of allowing multiple different species or entities elsewise to participate, then you gotta let the monsties use them too. It's just the way that it is. And pairing very well with what we were talking about and experiencing from Frankenstein just a few moments ago. All the things that we consider essential to humanity, if it is indeed a humanoid type of species that is capable of doing your magic, even if it were limited to just them, all of those characteristics are reproducible by creating, if not reproduced structures, then analogous ones. I really hope that this doesn't end up like an alien situation. Nobody says. Stargate is about an alien tech that allows interstellar travel by artificially created wormholes, but each gate has its own address. I mean, that makes sense. Even if we assume that there is some kind of non-geometric topology to spacetime. This is actually quite relevant to what I was learning just yesterday. That means that every place, unless you've got some sort of very strange kind of orientation, is locally Euclidean. It's a continuous manifold, which means even if there is curvature or other distortions to spacetime, whatever set of points that you're dealing with within that geometry is going to stay the same. So they would, by extension of that reason, if you had the capacity to create some mean of bending space-time, or at least poking holes through it to other locations, in a compressed fashion, they would have addresses of a sort. Here you go, enjoy a nice cheese. Or don't. The work I have put into this machine is unequaled by the reasoning of any man. The thought that generations of men have passed away since I first attempted to reconstruct the design is most tiring. I love the implications that come off of that. It's something I've thought about a good deal, and it's something that I am increasingly fascinated by as I encounter various fictions. The world we exist in, at the point that all of the matter is deposited into something that we can even say resembles Earth, or an Earth-like planet, somewhere that's at least habitable, it has, in most every sense, everything required for a sufficient intelligence to produce things that are considered damn near magical, insofar as their technologic prowess, capability, potential. In you go. What the hell? What the fuck was that? Hang on, does that work with more? Alright, can we pick up some of these bags? Yeah. Okay, I guess we... No shit. Oh, okay. Well, of all the interactions that I could have with it, especially after dissolving an entire pig and having its mesh stretch out across half of the screen, insert hand into acid is not what I anticipated. Nobody says... The world of my setting is rather large. My initial thought behind making it so big was admittedly flawed. Hey, don't let your dreams stay dreams. I obviously can't tell you what your world does and doesn't need, but expansivity, I'm generally quite in favor of. It gives a lot of leeway for feedback loops to spread out and engage with one another, so there's a distinct bias there. And in addition... Hang on now. Up. How do we do this? Up. Oh, it's too distant, I guess. Up. Why did that work? I I just sort of justified this by requiring spell slots being used and keeping the nodes tied to wherever I need the party to stick around. That's fair. As I say, I think that fast travel is perfectly reasonable, and it can be made immersive and therethrough realistic. It just requires the touch of ingenuity and inventiveness. The thing about any world, any setting, anything that the mind can participate in a creative sense, is that so long as you don't have a system which can derive a contradiction, the word for that being consistency, so long as you have consistency, all is well. It might lend to some very interesting conclusions, which you did not foresee, but that's the nature of dynamic systems. And in that, I see a great virtue. I see the potential for simulation. Can you see me? I really hope not. Oh, shit. And that's the basis of all gaming, really. Even if it has no anthropic interface, the assumption or insinuation of a human-like entity, like logic puzzles or things of that sort. You're still simulating an experience, even if it is purely syntactic, in the way of those logic puzzles, as I had mentioned. That is game. Yeah, it's well lit in here. That means you can't come in. Everybody knows monsters are afraid of light and all. It would be just perfect if I could fling a vial of acid at that thing, D&D style. Yep, I knew that was gonna work. Oh, there's little fish. Not only is that a neat detail, but it also lets you know, hey, this water is probably not, at least right now, going to execute you. Ahoy! I seem to have arrived just in time to see you're playing with the acid vat. I spent a lot more time doing that than I care to admit. I'll be completely real with you. If I wasn't streaming, I'm the kind of guy, because I grew up with pseudo-open world stuff like Hitman Contracts, Ghost Recon, and a few other open worlds like Spyro, Pac-Man World Adventures, that sort of thing. Half of those games is just fucking around and finding out. So if it were on my own time and I had no interest in making this particularly enjoyable, to actually follow along with and getting through the story, I'd be rolling around in some absolute nonsense. I would almost certainly break at least a couple of objects physics. And make that pig that stretched out into infinity look like it was still in good shape. Whoever wrote these loading bumpers really knew what they were doing. It makes me feel like the writers for those interstitial bits of text, which is an interesting way to preserve pacing as well as present new information, either read a good sum of older texts, or it might be quotes from those that existed at the time. The style has very much of that 18th century feel like we just experienced in Frankenstein. Oh! Shit. What he says, he also added the monsters being hip to the nodes, being used as a way to keep the players from constantly dipping back and forth through them, to cheese the adventure. That's wise. Also, something that needs to be accounted for, and having a lot of degrees of freedom in how one adventures, much more so in a tabletop scenario than in a video game, it means there's a lot that has to be accounted for. Nobody says, I don't want to even imagine how much I'd have accomplished in my life if I hadn't fucked around so much in Daggerfall in the first two Thief games. That's the reason I haven't played those games yet. I have... oh shit. I've watched a fair sum of media on them. I think it was Civi 11's stuff that I watched a lot of in Thief. It's very good. Civi's a great creator from what I've seen. Don't know anything about him personally, naturally, but great content. But I know that just like with RimWorld, and to a more limited extent because at least it is a narratively driven, non-roguelike that I am presently doing with Baldur's Gate 3, it would consume so many hours of my life, and I'd have a great time during the entire extent, but I'd get nothing done, and that's how you know you've got a great game. For the same reason, as we said earlier, that if you have systems that are able to be participated in by anyone besides the hero, which you can make ones that are exclusive to them, but you have to have a reason therefore, and oftentimes that reason is something that's transferable, as it can be picked up or otherwise made use of by other beings. Many of them are such a way because of the desire for things like power that can be passed on, if not by lineage, then at least by circumstance, so on and so forth. But if you're going to have any such that is participable by anything else, unless there's an express reason that evildoers and or monsties can't, then you simply have to make it not cheesable. Otherwise, it completely defeats the purpose, unless your world is built on something that is cheesy, which is totally fine. But it can deflate tension very rapidly. What? Hello? Huh? What? I know this is the kitchen, but it is not mealtime. Piss off. Don't Draugr at me. Go away. Get. Begone, thought. Fucking cheeky cheeks. Nobody continues. Just getting from point A to point B is resource intensive, as it should be. At no point do I tell my players they can't just go wherever they want, but I did make it so that they don't just hit the road on a whim. And when they do travel, it's often an adventure in itself. I love making random encounter tables, almost as much as I love using them. I feel you. Having a random encounter, opportunities are infinite. And as far as I'm concerned, unless there's a pressing reason that you just can't go around at your own whim, that's how it should be. Unless you predicate your campaign on being railroaded, it is dishonest, at best, to take the right of choice from your players. They're players by virtue of having choices to make at all. You're shitting me. Can I drill it? Can I chisel it? Can I light it on fire? Okay, then. Where is that busted-up lock? Ho, old bussy! Wherefore art thou? The way that you combine that principle, the principle of choice, with having anything resembling a coherent story, is by giving your world or setting, if it's not an entire world, reasons to operate like it does. In the case of travel, even if you're not playing a brutal style of campaign, there's still going to be the rations, inventory, all the things that you would assume and associate. To travel, they have their own parts, they have their own intrigues, their own flavors, twists, and turns that they can add to the story to include, like we seem to enjoy, having a little bit of random chance involved in those interactions. I think was best exemplified and gave it so much presence and playing power in Organ Trail and all things that are derivative of it, to include characteristics that you see even in like Pathfinder Kingmaker, is that it's not all bish bash. These are living things that are being dealt with, that are being played with, that are being experienced. That'll loop me back around. That's cheeks. All, each and every crucial concepts. Not only if you're building the world, taking the role of being a DM, but also if you're just enjoying the game. The thing about all of the subject matter we're discussing here is it's universally applicable. Being a player and having a good understanding of the tenets, principles, ideas that make up gameplay itself, it'll enable you not only to play the game a lot more richly, but model what's going to happen such that you can prepare in a way that does not break your immersion and it doesn't become metagaming. Because the difference between theoretic knowledge of game structure, poetics, a grasp of the structure of linguistics, and how they interface and correspond with objects, is more than anything, I would argue, that one is universal and is what gaming supervenes upon, and the other is mining the game rules themselves. It's all varying degrees of specificity. I don't know how you could possibly have that much spare oil to be draining out. That looks... It's blacker than night. It must be crude oil. This place must be setting on a naphtha deposit like no one has ever known. Tying methods of travel to party level can be considered a bit railroady, but it's also something of a mercy. Giving a party an airship might seem like a fun idea, but when they decide to make it fly to the big bad's base and crash it into their tower, well, let's just say that it's not a very satisfying story to tell or play in. Agreed! In a world with airships such that the party can acquire one, unless they are literally like new Messiah type figures or come from a place that is wildly different in levels of tech, and they either build it or port it over, you're gonna have things like air defenses, or something that is versatile enough, like, I don't know, launching giant balls of magical fire, grape shot, something like that, to plop those bastards out of the sky. The likelihood of being able to crash a giant airship into a big bad's location is not high, we'll say. And if it does happen, it will probably just be a great way to get yourself in a state of ruin, because they will have some way to overcome that issue. I see the ability... Your 6 feet fall distance onto soft, relatively soft, wooden floor is enough for fall damage. My dude must have ankles like glass. If you reflect on playing the kinds of open world games, let's think Grand Theft Auto, Mercenaries, classic favorite of mine, Far Cry, all of the games where you can just skip over massive features of the terrain and fly through the air. Okay, sure, you can have that. It is very convenient, but story is really not a feature of convenience. They participate in one another because the ultimate inconvenience is death. That's the big thing that'll prevent you from moving forward. But while they can go hand in hand, and naturally do, if you have too much of one over the other, you're going to eliminate a great deal of potential, which is what inconvenience is. And that isn't just limited to games, it's pretty much the whole quest of everything. I would argue that it's not necessity that's the mother of invention, but rather inconvenience. There are many sufficient ways to abide a necessity, but developing new sufficiencies is a lot more, one might say, challenging, story-driven.
Suddenly, the blue light was stained by strains of red, and the walls burst with pulsating tissue resonating with the scene. Alexander quickly covered the orb in some cloth, and the unspeakable thing vanished. Apparently, the orb's shadow is closer than Alexander thought. He said I should prepare for a warding ritual tomorrow. I'm not sure what he expects, but I have a bad feeling about this.
That is some very calm language for an individual who literally just saw magic. Literally. Not just regular magic either. Not like your wizard warlock woo-woo, but genuine artificer type shit. I'll tell you, I would be a lot more, interested, at the least. As we say, all matter has a form, and that form is something that necessarily participates with other forms. And because that is the case, when we have those forms, what do we call those? We might say that they are particular encodings or collections of information. So when you cross enough information over itself, time over time, in feedback loops, that is going to necessarily yield some kind of outcome. It's going to render something. And so to recapitulate, life is in and of itself a story, and the things that produce invention are the interactions of that story. As we said earlier, gaming is simulation of something, whether it is predominantly a matter of structure, significance, or context. And because of that, inconvenience is the thing that is being simulated in talks, in conversation, in dialogue with conveniences. The red taint burst from the walls, as if they had begun to bleed. That's a horrible fate I would not wish on the worst enemy. If you're going to have a system of traversing through air, it's gonna have to be something that's accounted for, as a matter of fact. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a massive imbalance between what the players can do and the creatures in your world. And if you want to have an interesting dialogue of conveniences and inconveniences in your simulation, literary, visual, audio, ludic, any of these, you have to have something that's crunchy. Arguably, I think that's probably one of the reasons that more primitive fantasies are the preference. Remembrance for a lot of story settings. And as a matter of fact, while a lot of movies don't tend to focus very heavily on the contemporary period where we have effective mastery of communication over great distance in addition to really significantly convenient modes of transport, it expedites everything. It reduces the challenge from a coarse, grainy, difficult, matter-of-fact thing to kind of like mashed potatoes. They're always going to have an underlying taste and texture of being mush. Unless you get into the weeds of things, of course. You can do that happily, and many sci-fi settings do. But that does require, usually, quite a great deal more consumer investment into the thing. And nobody continues. You can go pretty much anywhere, but you're stuck there until you get through whatever is waiting. Like what's happening in Balcaron, which, for the context of anybody, is a place in his setting. Detailed in the Discord, join below, join. A shameless plug, hoping to make the place a place of content, creators, community. The CCC. And don't forget to play, so we can have a pee on the But yes, he has detailed a lot of it. I would highly suggest taking a read of it because it is fascinating if you have any mind and any taste for anything fantasy with a little spice, a little pizzazz of sci-fi thrown in there, because Illithid's mind flayers do play a pretty significant role thereabouts. Nobody says. I often explain my setting game style as a sandbox that's full of little railroads. I wouldn't say that that's too far off from the default. Even barring something like modules, you're going to have, no matter what, plot threads, because things are ongoing. Stuff's happening in the world. Unless you're just playing tourist through time and space, there are a number of features that are necessarily going to have to be something that walks, talks, and quacks like a railroad. Think about it like this. If you have a character, that character is necessarily, unless you're, like, just a non-entity. You just spawned in, fully prepared for whatever they're going to do next, which is some, but it's very rare. It's rare for a reason. They themselves come built with railroads. They have backstory. If you haven't that, then you don't have a character. You have what amounts to a pawn. Yes, nobody. If you'd like to give me a tip, that'd be great, because I'm 1,000,000% overlooking whatever it is, and I feel like it's very obvious, but I'm simply not connecting A to B. I would much rather you give me the details besides having to do the type of shame. You're kidding me. What do you mean, walk up onto the jam? That thing is way up there, and I'm down here. If I'm down here and it's up there, and this bridge is over here, and we're standing in the here, what am I to do? That is at least a brilliant execution of the thing. Instead of having a very broad, obvious highlight for all of these minute details, it simply appears as another selection of debris. Random pipes strewn about, albeit there were gestures, subtle hints that can be taken note of if you're actually paying it much mind, nonetheless, easily overlooked. It takes the environment from just being a random assemblage of places to traverse through, in combination with the resource management we've discussed, to a necessary part of the story. Yep. And death. Okay, well. Tread carefully. Oh, I didn't get it right, perhaps. Interesting. It was a glitch! Fucking called it! You've got to be kidding me. Okay, well, maybe I did it out of sequence. That was the issue. But I'll tell you, I'm happy. I'm happy that I didn't have to... Because there's no going back. It's just auto-saving. I could not reload from any point previous to even entering this space. Well, now as a reward, I get to break my ankles of glass. My glass bones! Paper skin! No! I thank you all for attending here today. If you enjoyed it, you might consider it worth a like, share, subscribe. Follow our links in the description if you want more of us, especially to see our content put out in its clip forms, its highlights, and everything else over on Spotify, BitChute, TikTok, X, Instagram, and the threefold manifold Discord server. If you thought it perhaps worth a little bit of your hard-earned coin, there are also links in the description to Stream Elements as well as Patreon. Patreon, of course, gives you, at the lowest tier of proponent, $5, the ability to participate in polls for whatever we do on the channel, get all of our content collated into one convenient place, have your names at the end of every piece of long-form content, like the highlights and the streams that we're doing here, and perhaps other benefits as we increase in size and capacity over the course of time. Otherwise, I hope that you all never miss your opportunity.